She just does so much research and she knows what she's talking about. She always makes you want to go back and research the things that she talks about.
Curious butterflies.
You mean bread and butterflies?
Oh, yes, of course.
Hey everyone, it's Kayla from KJ and Her Books and welcome back to my channel. We are here in my lounge room because it's a little bit messy out there where I usually film because of moving and it's just a little bit chaotic. But today I am here to do a book review, which I have not done in quite a while. I don't know what sparked me to do this book review. I guess I just really enjoyed this book so much that I wanted to talk about it. So today we're going to be talking about this book, Walking by Kim Kelly. Kim Kelly is an Australian author and she writes a lot of historical fiction, historical romance style stories, and they are always amazing, always thoroughly researched. The romance is always very well done and very realistic. Now, you probably saw this book in my Femathon TBR and my March TBR. This was the book for the prompt disability or neurodiversity in Femathon, and I picked it purely for disability representation. And I really just felt the need to talk about this book because it's one of those books that you don't hear of quite often, especially when it's by an Australian author. I feel like Australian authors do not get a lot of hype. It's very, very rare that an Australian author becomes super popular, and especially when it involves historical fiction. And I feel like we definitely need to talk about these books and these authors a lot more often because these stories just need to be told, and a lot of them are so beautiful that it's a shame that they don't get read as much as they should. Now, this book is dual perspective. A lot of Kim's books are, and it is set in 1948 in Sydney, Australia. This one follows 4 different perspectives. We follow Lucy, Hugo, Elliot, and Jim. Jim's perspective is definitely not as prominent as the other 3. His comes in more closer towards the end of the story. Lucy is more of like the main protagonist, as her story we're following is in the present, whereas Hugo's and Elliot's is set in the past. A couple of trigger warnings before we get into this. If you do get triggered by like medical style stuff, I tend to get triggered a lot by health issues and medical issues. Mainly the reason why I can't watch medical dramas like Grey's Anatomy anymore, because it does trigger a lot of health anxiety. This one is not so prominent in the health anxiety for me, but it could be for other people. So I do say that there is like health related stuff, medical related stuff, especially to do with like bones and injuries to bones and like that sort of those sort of scenarios. A couple of trigger warnings there. There's also, you know, war references, internment camp references. There's also trigger warnings for sexual assault or like domestic abuse type stuff. If I can think of any more, I will add them to the description in this video, but so far it's just pretty much like war, health, medical stuff, sexual assault, domestic abuse. That's pretty much what I can think of. Okay, so the characters that we are following, I will start with Hugo's perspective first, and then I'll just like gradually go into like the other 3 perspectives, and I'll just give you like a brief idea of what their perspectives are about and what we follow in their sides of the story. This story starts in Lucy's perspective and it starts in the present. So like I said, 1948 in Sydney, and the prominent orthopedic surgeon Hugo Winter has passed away, and that sort of kicks off this story. So I'm going to start with Hugo's perspective. In Hugo's perspective, we pretty much follow him from when he's younger to when he's older and when he actually does pass away. So we follow all these different events in his life. Hugo, like I said, is a prominent orthopedic surgeon. He is amazing. He is renowned. People love him, people envy him, and of course people dislike him and do not like his methods. We see a lot of the stuff that Hugo does, and he's always making sure that he's doing the best for his patients and trying to help them out and get them better, get them through recovery, get them healthy again, and get them walking. But in his perspective, we see a lot of the crap that he's had to go through. in his journey and in his career of being an orthopedic surgeon. So we see why he's chosen this particular path in the medical career, and we see all the challenges that he has had to face. Of course, being that he has grown up with World War One, and then towards the end of his life is World War Two. So he has seen a lot of the crazy stuff that has happened throughout those years. Now, what I found was actually really interesting. So we do get a mention of internment camps, which I never really thought that much about being like related to Australia. I didn't really think about having those type of work camps here. And through this story and the research that Kim did for it, I did my own research and I found out that the place that I actually live in, we had an internment camp, and I was just amazed. I did not expect that to be something that would be so close to where I live. So in this, the Liverpool internment camp is mentioned, which I didn't even know about, but that was also interesting. And going from that was when I found out that there was one here where I live. So where we have the showground here, which is, you know, just the normal showground where you have like the fairs and the annual show that we have, I would never have expected it to be a place that was covered in barbed wire, that housed a lot of people that were Germans who were pretty much quarantined away from normal people and were put to work. It definitely wasn't as intense as some of the other camps, and of course as intense as the camps that were mentioned in this book, but it was still really interesting to find out that it was here. And I'll tell you an interesting story about that, just diverting from this book for a second. Upon my research of finding out that there was a camp here, I found a little story that there were people who were in this camp that actually escaped, and it wasn't exactly like a Great Escape, Shawshank Redemption kind of thing. These guys lifted up the fence and walked out. That was it. I find that absolutely hilarious because the guards were obviously not that observant. There was obviously not high security for these guys to just walk out. They lifted up the fence, they walked out, and they were gone. Like, can you imagine what an interesting, hilarious story that would be to tell your grandkids, your children and your grandkids? It's quite funny, but I kind of wish I knew who they were. Like, that would be even more interesting, but that was the only information I could find. But it was still very cool to find out that that happened here. So that was very interesting. Back on the story, we follow Hugo growing up, why he got into the orthopedic side of surgery, and the kind of person that he's like and the kind of person that he grows into. We see who he marries, we see his family, we basically follow his life, and it's a very, very interesting life, and you do feel so bad for the guy in a lot of instances, especially with the fact that he tries so hard to help people. He works so very, very hard. He also is referred to as kind of like a Robin Hood because he helps the rich for money. So all the people who can afford, he will obviously charge them, and the people who can't afford him, he helps anyway, but with the money that he's been given from the rich people. So he helps all the ones who can't afford it, and he enjoys that more because he's just that kind of person. He is like a Robin Hood surgeon, and I love that about him. I thought he was a fantastic character. I loved reading his perspective. It was so interesting, especially he died at the very beginning, and that like so many people were so upset over him, the loss of him, and then you get to see why. Like, I really loved that. So the next perspective I will talk about is Elliot Slade. So Elliot was kind of like Hugo's nemesis. They did not get along. They hated each other. Well, Elliot hated Hugo so much. He just hated everything that he stood for. And Elliot is the kind of person that you love to hate him. He is not a redeemable character in the slightest. He has nothing about him that makes you think, oh, you know, he had a tough childhood, he went through this, he went through that, like that is the reason for him being the way he is. There was nothing like that. Elliot was just a awful human being, an asshole just for the sake of being an asshole. And I loved that Kim was able to create a character and write a character that had no redeemable qualities, nothing about him that was good, nothing about him that you'd be like, okay, well, he's only trying to do this, he's only trying to do that. It was just, you're like, no, he's a bad person, and there is nothing about him that is good. He doesn't have a good bone in his body. And so reading his perspective was very interesting because it wasn't like you read his perspective and you hated it. Like you weren't, I wasn't like dreading it as I was coming across his perspective. I was more interested because I wanted to know, how bad could this person get? Like, how much worse can he get as a human being? Like, surely there must be something good about him, but there wasn't. Like, all throughout the story there was nothing good about him. You were just reading about how bad of a person he was. And he treated Hugo like crap. He treated his patients like crap. He treated his co-workers like crap. He treated his wife and his family like crap. There was nothing good about him. And the thing is, comparing him and Hugo, there were a lot of people who actually loved Elliot and wanted him to look after them over Hugo because they thought that Elliot was going to be better. Like, they saw Elliot as this better surgeon. And it's funny that Elliot got to the same point that Hugo was at before he died. Like, they got to that same level of being an orthopedic surgeon and all that work that they've done over the years. But you could see that people still liked Elliot. Even though you knew he was a bad person, he still had like his fans. He still had people who supported him and supported his work. And that's very realistic because there are a lot of people who go in that situations where you don't understand how they're still in that job and how they got there, because you know that they're such a bad person, but somehow they still climbed that ladder. Somehow they still got to the top. And I think that's what Elliot represents. And when I spoke to Kim about it and said how much I loved that she wrote a character you could absolutely hate, her response was that it was a compilation of different people who were like this, who would climb a ladder no matter who they stepped on, and they would get to the top. It didn't matter how they got there. They wanted to get there. That was their ultimate goal. And that's who Elliot is. He is the kind of person who doesn't care who he steps on, doesn't care what he does to anybody else, as long as it benefited him in the end. And he was a horrible surgeon. Like, everything he did was to be beneficial to him and not the patients. He didn't care whether they recovered. He didn't care whether they died. He didn't care whatsoever. It was only if he could succeed in like his ideas and like, you know, choosing what he could do to help them and going off that and seeing, you know, if he succeeded or if he failed. It wasn't in the interest of the patient at all. It was only in the interest of him. So he is an awful person, and I feel so bad for his wife and his family in this. Like, honestly, he was a very terrible person in this, and I still loved reading about him, but it was just a really bad person. And I think Kim wrote him exceptionally well, that you hated him, but you were still interested in reading his story. The next perspective is Lucy. So like I said, she is the main protagonist. She is the one we are really following more than anything else, because she's the one who's going through all of Hugo's papers. She's the one that has been with him all these years. She's the one that he helped, and he's the reason that she's gone into being a physiotherapist. So when she first met Hugo, she had a terrible injury and they thought she wasn't going to be able to get any better. She'd lost her mum. She eventually loses her dad, and Hugo was the only one that was able to help her, and he got her better. He got her cured of the injury that she had. He healed her and he helped her, and she will always love him for that. He was like another father to her, a father who actually cared. That in turn made her want to become a physiotherapist. So she basically works at the same hospital that Hugo worked at, and she spends her days looking after people and helping them to recover and get back to normal. And when she's at this hospital, not long after Hugo dies, she meets Jim Cleary, who has come in with a very, very bad injury. I can't remember what happened, but he came in with a really, really bad injury. And they're trying to work out how to get him better and how to heal him, but she's dealing with a lot of misogyny in this hospital from Elliot Slade and from a lot of other people, but she just wants to help him, and she wants to use the knowledge that she's gained from Hugo to help him. She gets assigned to Jim, and she's basically there. She basically becomes super close to him, and they end up developing an attraction, developing a romance, which was so beautiful and heartwarming and wholesome, because Jim is just a beautiful character and they both help each other. She works out what she wants through him, and they sort of help each other overcome all these different obstacles and the things that they've had to deal with, especially the fact that Jim was in World War II and he did have to fight, and all the stuff that Lucy has had to deal with growing up and working underneath people who just wanted to treat her like crap, and how, like, you know, she's never going to be anything more than a physiotherapist, even though she wants to be a doctor, even though she wants to get higher up, but people just keep pushing her down. And you know, I adored Lucy. I thought she was a beautiful character, and I loved hearing about her connection to Hugo and her growing attraction with Jim. I thought it was just so well done. And then Jim Cleary, we see his perspective sort of briefly towards the end. There's not too much behind it. It's pretty much giving him a perspective of things that we need to see his side when we're not needing to see Lucy's side. Like, we're needing to see his perspective on the situation with Lucy and his family and his experience in the war. So that's pretty much why we see his perspective. But there is so much going on in this story. There is so many different things happening that's all connected to Hugo and Elliot, and I think Kim just wove a really beautiful story. It was actually inspired by a true surgeon. I can't remember what his name was, but it was inspired by a true story, which I love these stories of Kim's because almost always they're inspired by something true. And she always does amazing historical research for these stories and for these characters. I don't know how she does it, but she just puts so much work into her stories, and I love it. And this one was just so well done. It wasn't something that I thought I was going to love as much as the other books because of the medical stuff. I didn't think I was going to be able to wrap my head around the medical terminology and everything that is mentioned in here about orthopedics. I didn't think I was going to be interested in, but I really enjoyed it, and it surprised me so much how I enjoyed it. And Kim is just a wonderful storyteller, so I knew I was going to love it because of her writing and because of her previous works that I've loved. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to, so it was just brilliant. Following all these different perspectives definitely was perfect for the story. It definitely worked. It wouldn't have worked well if there was only one perspective, if we were only following Lucy. But the fact that we got to follow various different people and their stories, it just made it. So I did give this book 5 stars. I really loved it. I love historical fiction, and if you are trying to delve into historical fiction, I highly recommend reading Kim's books, because she just does so much research and she knows what she's talking about, and she always makes you want to go back and research the things that she talks about. I think it means a lot more to me because I am from Australia and because I can understand all the references and the places that they're at. But honestly, even if you aren't from Australia, you have to give Kim's books a chance because they are just very well done. Her writing is so easy to get into. It's not complex. It's not over descriptive. It's just easy to fall into. You just don't want to stop reading. Well, there we go, guys. That was my little book talk about Walking by Kim Kelly. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed hearing about what this story is about and hearing my thoughts. I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye.